Welcome to G.I.Joe Debriefed. It's so great to have everybody here with us this week, everybody that's with us live on Facebook. We have a number of guests with us. Of course, Diana Davis is visiting with us again this week. Thank you, Diana, for filling in for, just for being with us. And as it turns out, Brandon isn't able to make it. So we're glad we have our full cast of hosts. Of course, myself, Robert Atkins, and Tom Feister, with Carson as kind of running our tech for us as always. And then of course, our esteemed guest this week, we are happy to welcome Larry Hama here with us tonight. Thank you, Larry, so much for joining us.
Doing.
Hey, Larry. It's good to see you.
Hooray.
Yeah.
Yes. Very good to see you.
Yeah, very good. So just as a quick kind of recap to those who might be joining us from previous weeks, or just an introduction for those who just joined in. So we've been doing this weekly where we kind of get together as industry, either professionals or aficionados or people who follow the Joe line with a vested interest. We all get together each week to kind of watch some of the episodes, the old cartoons kind of in the background, sometimes have some silly commentary over the top. But mostly this has become a great opportunity to talk to a lot of the industry professionals who have had a huge say in the property and kind of bringing that to life. So, of course, this week we were able to get in touch with Larry and to bring him on the show with us. So while we will have the episode kind of playing in the background, mostly this is an opportunity for us to just chat with Larry and his experience kind of crafting, the lore of G.I. Joe that we've all grown up on and then grown to appreciate. Typically, we kind of start off with just a bit of a chat and a get to know you. And then once we start the episode, if you have any questions in the Facebook, just post in the comments. And when we get to a commercial break, we often ask some of those questions that were in the comments as a good kind of break in the show. So for people who aren't familiar with Larry's work, that's ridiculous.
There you go. Somebody had to say it.
Yeah, that's nuts. Yes.
So obviously Larry's involvement was just absolutely integral to the beginning of the line. So Larry, you were working at Marvel already, right? You were an editor there at the time when they approached you with G.I. Joe?
Yeah, I was editing Crazy magazine. I had just come over from DC, where I had been editing Wonder Woman, Super Friends, and Jonah Hex, and a bunch of other titles, till I got imploded out of DC.
Ow. Imploded out sounds horrible.
Sounds painful.
Yeah.
The previous year, they had the big DC explosion, so they hired all these people. And then exactly 1 year later, they had the implosion where they canceled a whole bunch of titles and laid off all the recent hires. So that's how I ended up. That was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Oh, there you go. It was a positive sort of implosion.
If I hadn't got imploded out of DC, I'd still be there editing Super Friends or something.
I'd read that. As I understand it, either from hearing it from you or reading it in the past, but how did the partnership between Hasbro and Marvel kind of happen? I think it kind of got passed around and people didn't quite know what to do with it. And that's when you kind of took it on. Is that kind of how that worked out?
Well, Hasbro wanted a comic of G.I. Joe. They had no idea how to do it. They really didn't have a concept for what the book would be like. So, but they were smart enough to know, they didn't know comics, right? So they went to Marvel and said, well, look, you know comics, you come up with this, and they had to look for somebody to write it. The problem at that point was that at that point in history, toy licensed comics were the absolute bottom of the barrel for comics. The licensing fee came off the top of the page rate.
Oh man.
Yeah, so that meant that licensed comics paid less than the comics that Marvel owned, the IPs that Marvel owned. So it was impossible to get any A-list or any even B-list writers, artists, or whatever to work on the books. And at that time, there were no royalties. All you got was the page rate, you know.
Yeah.
So nobody wanted to do it. They asked every single contract writer, and every single contract writer turned it down. And they asked every non-contract writer that had anything to do at Marvel, and they all turned it down.
Oh man.
And then Jim Shooter went from office to office, from editorial office to editorial office, asking the editors, assistant editors, gophers, interns, whatever. And he started at one end of Marvel and went office by office. And they all turned it down, even the interns, apparently. And my office was the last office in the row. So, they got to me, and I said yes.
Oh man.
Because I've been trying to get writing work from Marvel for years. And I was a full editor at Marvel. And no editor would give me writing work because they said, well, you can't write, you're an artist. Well, it's because, look, all the editors were writers.
Yeah.
Right? So if artists started writing their own stuff, I mean, that's spitting in their own wallets.
Right.
So, but I was able to prove to Jim Shooter that I had gone to every single editor at Marvel, and none of them would give me writing work. So he gave me dispensation to write for other companies while I was an editor at Marvel.
Wow, yeah.
My first regular writing work was for Louise, well, it was Jones at the time, but she's Louise Simonson. And she was at Warren. So I was doing a samurai strip called The Young Master with for Eerie magazine with Val Mayerick drawing it. And I just could not get anybody at Marvel to give me any writing work. So that's why I jumped at the chance to do this, and since nobody else wanted to do it. After I wrote the first issue, I thought, oh, Jesus, I really shot myself in the foot because I had no idea where to go with it. And in fact, I'm up to issue 276.
Yeah.
And I have never, every single issue, I mean, that's 276 issues of just A Real American Hero.
Right, yeah.
Special missions and Impact Comics and all sorts of things, And every single one was like stepping into the deep end of the pool and not knowing how to swim. I would start each story and have no idea how it was going to resolve, or where it was going to go, or even what was on the next page. So all these years, it's always been, page by page. If you look at the entire run at Marvel, there's never a coming attraction. There's never like, oh, next issue, blah blah blah, because
You didn't know?
Nobody knew.
It's an organic thing.
That has to be a record. I mean, for consistent number of issues by the same writer, I can't imagine anyone's even come close to that.
I don't know how many issues of X-Men did Claremont make, right?
How many did he do?
That's where my mind goes to.
I don't know.
It's worth looking into.
There were a bunch of guys that had really long runs,
Larry, I have a quick throwaway question. In G.I. Joe #1, there was a cameo of a character named Shooter. And famously, it was a tribute to Jim Shooter, the editor-in-chief at the time. Do you remember putting that in there? Was that your idea? Did somebody at Hasbro say to do it, or any recollection on Shooter?
No. That was, Rick Parker, the letterer, taking it upon himself to kiss butt
So that came from the letterer. I didn't know if you were thanking Jim for giving you your first writing job at Marvel.
By sticking the editor-in-chief's name
Yeah.
on the title page.
Funny.
I had to sort of like retcon that and write a whole story explaining who Shooter was.
And now we've got an action figure for
Yeah,
Shooter.
I like Shooter. Shooter's amazing.
Shooter's popped up several times since then due to this one letterer going off script.
Larry, you mentioned Crazy Magazine, and this was something I didn't know about till you told me that you were the creator of Obnoxio the Clown.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I had no idea.
And I based him physically on Al Milgrom, because I figured, one day, we might want to do a Fumetti where we have to dress somebody up as Obnoxio the Clown. So it'd be good to have somebody in the office. That's how these things work. Yeah.
So Larry, you famously never watched the cartoon, right? Like you didn't immerse yourself in the continuity of G.I. Joe outside of your continuity, which was the file cards and the comics and that kind of thing. But you do have some familiarity with some people that worked on the show, right?
I know a lot of people that worked on the show.
And you had a good friendship with Russ Heath, is that right?
I've known Russ since the early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
My wife worked on the show.
What did your wife do on the show?
She was the only employee of the Marvel Animation Studio in New York. She was like the ad rep.
Okay.
And not the ad rep, but she was the person that got this. She was the agent for the studio, and she knew all the people at the studio. She knew the directors and all the execs at the animation studio, and that's how I met, like Larry Houston and all those guys.
And that's where the Silent Castle crosses over into the Silent Issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, we noticed that was the series before this one, that castle design was very reminiscent of G.I. Joe number 21, commonly known as the Silent Issue. So had you seen Larry's artwork for that, this kind of set design that he did for that series, or?
Yeah, I saw it at the office.
You saw it at the office?
In LA. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're out here. For a while, you were out here almost every year, Larry, to visit family and check in on people, and that's when you hook up with Russ and some other folk.
Well, yeah, that plus I think that time that I saw it, I think it was because all the Marvel editors had gone to San Diego. Marvel footed the bill and sent all the editors to San Diego, and it was like a big photo op. We had to I don't know, Shooter made us all rent tuxedos and go to have our picture taken at the Penguin Pool at the San Diego Zoo. It was like 101 degrees.
Oh, God.
Now I want to see that picture.
And we're out there wearing rented tuxedos, at the San Diego Zoo. So, we did this whole thing in San Diego, and then we rented something like 6 or 7 cars. They were like Chrysler LeBaron convertibles.
Wow.
And we drove from San Diego up to LA. I was a designated driver, and I had Jim Shooter and Vinnie Coletta in my car for the ride up from San Diego to LA. And then we spent a couple of days visiting at the studio, and that's where I saw all the stuff and met Larry and Nelson Shin, who later went on to open an animation studio in Korea. And I think he was one of the early guys that did animation for The Simpsons.
Yeah.
But that's how it went down.
Carson, why don't you go ahead and get the episode going so I can just at least play in the background. And I'm really kind of curious to talk to Larry too about some of that early interaction when you got to add so much character to these designs you were seeing, that was coming in from Hasbro. And I'm just kind of curious about the logistics of, like, who was your point of contact and how did you see the visuals and then decide what you would put on those file cards to really kind of define these characters?
Well, I mean, the three main people I dealt with at Hasbro in the beginning were Bob Kukas, Kurt Bazigian, and Ron. So that was basically all who I ever actually met.
All right, those three guys.
Larry, one of the things I found interesting from the cartoon, talking about the cartoon's influence on the toys influence on the comic books, that kind of thing. In the very first miniseries, Snake Eyes was introduced as the commando version of himself. And we also met a wolf in the woods that befriends him and obviously becomes Timber. So that was an example of the cartoon creating something that stuck, that then came out as a toy several years later. Do you remember anything from the cartoon that they tried to get you to get in the comic and you might have pushed back on? Or do you remember any cartoon bleeding into the comic book for good or for bad?
Not that I can think of. I mean, I never saw any of the cartoons. That's why I was totally perplexed every time people would come up to me at conventions and say, knowing is half the battle.
You're like, okay.
Okay. I had no idea what they were talking about.
Trying to mesh these three different formats together, like, obviously whether or not you had seen the show, just coming from their end, like from those, especially from Kirk in particular, like, was there any direction from him to kind of add things into the book besides just that there was a new toy or a new wave of toys to try and introduce?
Well, no, but they really didn't try to, push me or influence me at all. They pretty much gave me free rein. You'd get promoted out of the job after a year and a new one would come in, and none of them had any idea what was going on with the continuity. And by the time, 3 or 4 years had gone by, there were so many characters and the continuity was so convoluted that none of them could keep up with it. So they just let me be after a while.
Was there anything that they came to you with that was a toy that you just kind of put your head in your hands and thought, oh God, how am I going to get this in here?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Dreadnoks was a good example. Well, they were more like cute teddy bears, and I said, you aren't thinking this through. You can't have the good guys be shooting these cute teddy bears. So I gradually convinced them to go with Aussie bikers.
What about the other direction? Was there anything that you came to them with and said, look, if you're going to do this, you're going to need a character who does X, Y, and Z?
Well, that's why I came up with the Baroness right at the beginning, first issue, because when I took the characters and I tried to put them on their feet, the story, I realized that none of the Cobras had faces. They were completely covered with masks. Well, the thing that Kurt Bazigian constantly keeps reminding people of, and they keep forgetting, is that they never thought of G.I. Joe as an action figure line. It was always a vehicle line. And the action figures were just there to complement the vehicles. The sales plan and the sales strategy was always about selling vehicles.
Right, and just kind of like a means to an end. To get the vehicle sold, then you need a driver and you need a story built around it, right?
Right. Well, the action figures were like the hamburgers to McDonald's.
Right.
The big profit margin it was for McDonald's is always the French fries and the sodas.
So Larry, I had a good comic book related question. So, standard practice back in the day where Marvel would pre-write and draw a filler issue, kind of a one shot, in case the book ever got behind schedule. You could just put in one of these filler issues and buy some more time for the book to get on track. And we know there's been a couple G.I. Joe issues like that. Were there any that were created that never saw print? Do you remember any stories that might have been filler issues that never made it out?
Well, I don't think there were very many, if there were any at all, because the policy was always that you had to commission a certain number of inventory issues, just in case, the original, the main crew got run over by a truck or something. You had to be able to have something in the flat file that you could throw into the breach. But of course, they have a very short shelf life because, as the continuity progresses, the story becomes obsolete, And this wasn't just for G.I. Joe, it was for the entire Marvel line. All the editors were required to commission inventory pieces as backups, but you were also expected to use them before they got stale. So that's why it was almost impossible to have a complete run of one team on any book. You look at any of those Marvel books and, even if something's going good, they throw in the inventory because they have to use it up. They, on super top selling books, like maybe like, Spider-Man and X-Men, they might have fudged with that rule, but almost everything else, you had to use up the inventory.
I wonder if that's where the idea for some of the annuals came from, as a way of burning off those extra stories and not displacing a crew for an issue.
No, all the annuals were done specifically as annuals. Everything was created specifically for those books.
Now, you mentioned as far as missing an issue or something happening to the team. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about issue 21 and what happened and how that book was created.
I can't really remember what the exact situation was, but like for some reason, Denny, who was the editor, Denny O'Neil, we needed to generate another issue, like right away. Maybe, one of the backup teams had fallen behind. I can't remember the exact reason why, but we had to come up with an entire issue in like 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks, which, to all you guys that draw and write the stuff,
Yeah, just to kind of give the audience just a slight bit of context. Typically, to draw a page of comics takes a full day, or pretty close to a full day. And even some of the fastest artists, it's going to take you a full day to pencil and ink, which is just one page. Right? And if you have, how long were the books back then? Like 22, 24 pages?
22 pages.
22. So obviously, on a regular pace, that's minimum 22 days. Then you have to color it, you have to letter it, it's got to get to the printer, all these things.
And those pages, you're not the person inking them. The pages have to go from the penciler to the inker, and that's going to take travel time.
Yeah, everything was FedEx.
A lot of travel time involved because even because there were no JPEGs and no attachments, you had to send the physical pages, and the fastest way you could send them was like FedEx. So that was a whole day.
Here's an interesting question that someone's asked. Were the comic commercials done before or after the comic they advertised? Like, they gave you a list of things that had to be in the comic, and they gave the same list of things to the people who are doing the episodes, right? So had they already planned the animation for the commercials, knowing what vehicles and characters were going to be in the issue that was advertised, which was sometimes overlapping with the cartoon? Do you know?
They asked me to design 4 covers for the 4 commercials, right? And they gave me a list of figures and vehicles they wanted to, sell, basically, which is why you have like one cover that has both, a snow vehicle and a hang glider in it, and I had to do this way in advance. I did all 4 in like the first 2 weeks or something, and then they had because they needed to actually draw the cover and paste it up, because at the end of the commercial, the cover spun out, out of the background, and they said coming next month, blah blah blah, So when I got to that issue and I had to write it, I had to fit the story to fit the cover. What that eventually led to is I realized, with no restrictions, I can just design like really kick-ass covers, because at the time I was doing cover sketches for the other offices. Plus, I was doing a cover sketch for every issue that came out of my office. I did the cover sketches for Crazy, for Conan the Barbarian, for Savage Tales, all that stuff. And when and I would do cover sketches for the other editors, so they would send me Xeroxes of the pencils, and I'd have to look through them and figure out how to make a cover for that book, But so in designing those covers, you were restricted by what was actually in the story. This was in the days when the cover really reflected what was in the story. Those days are long gone. I haven't seen a cover that actually reflected what was in a comic in ages, So I realized I was better off designing a cover first before I came up with the story, So that's what I did. I always start off with the visual, rather than an idea that's in words.
Was the cover the climax you had to build to, or was it just something that you would put in somewhere in the story?
It was just wherever, I was just going for the kick-ass image. But that's where I always start from. I've never identified as a writer. A lot of it was because I had to draw comics for years and years and years before anybody would let me write one. Pretty much everybody I'm friends with in the business are the people that draw and not the people that write. And I don't think in writerly terms. I've never written an outline in my life. I really don't know how to construct a story that way. I literally start by nailing the first page and then going page by page after that until I get to the end.
And I think, sorry I interrupted earlier, just to kind of give some context to process, but you had mentioned like you had like 3 weeks to do this silent issue number 21. So just kind of back to that real quick, like obviously what led to the decision for it to be silent, and how did that kind of writing?
Well, I had a meeting with Benny and I said, well, look, if we do a silent and there's no lettering, we save like a week. We don't have to ship the pages to the letterer and have it wait for it to ship back and blah, blah, blah. So I said, okay, let's have no lettering. And I said, look, I'll write it and do the breakdowns at the same time. And so I started on Friday and I handed in the finished breakdown on Monday. I did 22 pages in 3 days. Um, they weren't finished pencils, but they were tight enough for Steve Leialoha to do finishes on. So,
Necessity is the mother of invention.
well, yeah, and the Larry Houston drawing of the castle was really essential and integral, because I looked at that thing and I thought, the basis of the design is trapezoids, and that there were different design elements to almost every level of the castle. So I thought, this is really good for a story that has no words, because if I just draw this entire castle in the first page, draw it from like head to foot, I've established everything there is to know about this castle. And from then on, I only have to put in a little piece of it in the background for the reader to know where something is taking place. Having the entire thing take place in this type of structured environment really makes the drawing of it easier, because I could play with the shapes of the rooms, and the doors, things like that. They were all trapezoids, right? And there were some levels that had columns, and there were some levels that had these long, tall, skinny windows, and so I made myself a diagram of the interiors, so that I could track the characters through it, and literally just played it by ear. I got to like the middle of the story, and Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes are in a fight, and they both tear their sleeves, their right sleeves. And I thought, oh, what can I do with that? And I thought, what if I put a tattoo? What if both of these characters had the same tattoo in the same place?
Bum, bum, bum.
And now a bunch of 40-year-olds have that same tattoo in the same place.
and I thought, yeah, that would be really cool. I had no idea why they both had the tattoos. Or, the I Ching hexagram I had used before in Iron Fist. If you look at those early issues of Iron Fist, I designed a character called Lei Kung the Thunderer, and he has this breastplate, with an I Ching hexagram on it.
Did you choose that particular hexagram for a specific reason to do with both characters, or was it just because it was relatively sort of a symmetrical one with the dashes and lines?
I went with the most symmetrical ones I could, because I needed to be able to remember it.
I still go back and remember, okay, wait, does the break happen on the first bar or the second bar? Every single time, as many times as I've drawn this character, I still have to go back and double check.
It's really interesting because it means fire over water, I think. But if you flip it upside down, it means the exact opposite. So it's an interesting play on the two characters.
Well, it's actually, the name of the hexagram is after completion. And when it's reversed, it's called before completion.
Ah.
The stuff about the fire is about the actual elements of the lines in the hexagram itself, but the actual meaning is after completion. I've had a copy of the I Ching since I was about 17, I have the original ball engine edition with the preface by Carl Jung. Carl Jung was really hung up on something called synchronicity, which is what the I Ching is pretty much based on. Yeah.
So it would be the broken part at the top then,
Right,
for
exactly.
after completion, and it means every triumph brings new challenges.
And how often have you seen the tattoo upside down on someone and just had to bite your tongue?
Bunch of times.
Do they ask you to sign their forearms?
The first time I actually saw a G.I. Joe related tattoo, I was at the first G.I. Joe convention I went to, which was I don't think it was the first ever, but it was the one I went to, which was in Norfolk, Virginia.
I remember that one.
And so I'm sitting there signing stuff, and this guy in a Cobra Commander costume walks up to me, and he doesn't say anything. He just starts taking off his clothes.
I've had nights. No, I'm not kidding. I've had nights like that.
And I'm like, whoa. And he opens up his tunic, and he's got a Cobra sigil the size of a Voigt basketball, tattooed on his chest.
Oh my gosh.
Good Lord.
And all I could think of to say was, my God, that must have hurt.
That's huge.
That guy might be listening right now. We love your tattoo. It's
It was
amazing.
gigantic.
Larry, one of the kind of running gags on this show is my mom usually tunes in, and she just reminded me there's 3 rules in the Metaxas house: no piercings, no motorcycles, and no tattoos. And that's the only reason I probably don't have one of those.
Dude, even my parents let me have a motorcycle.
Yeah. Larry, one of our good friends, Philip, wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about the Fury Force. I know that was a concept you had worked on before Hasbro came to Marvel to get the G.I. Joe book made. You already had some ideas cooking. Can you talk a little bit about Fury Force and how that influenced G.I. Joe?
I pitched this idea to Marvel, and they rejected it. I thought, let's do a book about Sergeant Fury's son, who's also a special forces sergeant, and he's in charge of an elite unit, and they're a counter-terrorist force, and they've got a secret headquarters below the chaplain's assistant school in Staten Island at Fort Wadsworth. There was a big guy with a machine gun. There was like this really sort of spooky guy with no face. There was a girl. There was, but basically all the characterizations were there. So I just sort of adapted them to the Hasbro figures.
So this brings up an interesting topic that we've talked about previously on the cartoon as well. You brought a lot of ideas to the party. You didn't just rely on Hasbro to provide you with all the characters. Was there any kind of uphill battle to get your ideas turned into plastic? Like, for example, we didn't get any October Guard figures until the early 90s with Red Star. And obviously they were a, pretty central group of characters in the book well before then. Can you talk a little bit about, maybe what discussions might have been like with Hasbro about turning your ideas into plastic for us to play with?
Well, I didn't really press it. I just sometimes I just had to come up with other characters just to fill stuff out. I think it was Tom DeFalco that came up with the prototype version of the October Guard. I think it was from some Marvel black and white book, and I think he called it the Pravda Patrol or something. I said, I wasn't crazy about that name.
Did you come up with the October Guard battle cry, or did that come from the cartoon? Their battle cry was "New Pagodi," which, if you look it up, it's the line from an old Russian Tom and Jerry ripoff, where it was a wolf, and I forget what the other animal was, and the wolf always failed to catch the other animal, and he got embarrassed, and at the end he'd yell "New Pagodi," which means "just you wait."
Huh.
And I was wondering where that one came from.
No, that didn't come from me. No. I never thought that they would even. It never occurred to me that they would make figures out of these characters. You know, like they eventually did a Quentin figure. You know, and a Billy.
You know, that's all within like the last 5 years, right?
Yeah.
As a kid, I used to have nightmares about Quinn. I don't know why, but something about that character absolutely terrified me, and I would have nightmares that he was chasing. Yeah, absolutely true. Yeah, I don't know what it was about him, but just absolutely terrified me. So I want to ask, as G.I. Joe, and I know we have to let you go here soon, but as G.I. Joe was like exploding for Marvel, did Marvel ever come to you to try to say, hey, maybe Spider-Man should show up? Or were there ever any conversations about trying to cross G.I. Joe over with other Marvel characters? I know they weren't related in terms of ownership, but were there conversations about trying to do that stuff?
Too many legal difficulties with that.
Gotcha.
I think I did try to sneak characters in. You know, I think I had Joe's. They were in one episode. They were at a supermarket opening or something, and there was a guy wearing a hot suit or something. You know, I mean, there were things like that.
Duke showed up unnamed, and I think Wild Bill did too, or somebody, or Ace maybe, in Secret Wars. They drew them in. They never used their names, but they were Sergeant. Okay, I don't like it, but okay.
It's not even subtle. He's got the same bandolier. He's got the same uniform design.
Yeah.
It's Duke. It's
Duke.
It's Spider-Man number 268 for anybody out there that wants to go check this out.
Yeah, and I think there's a Sky Striker in there and other stuff too. I mean, everyone sees those two frames, but there's a few others that just snuck in there.
That's cool.
That were kind of a shock. Like, oh, wait a minute, I know that guy.
Yep, it had to be Duke.
So they snuck it in when Hasbro wasn't looking.
Hey, so everybody, we think Larry, we thank you so much for your time tonight. We try to keep these, relatively brief so that everybody can, just have a little bit of time to be entertained and to learn a little bit about the behind the scenes of how these things got made. Usually not from us, but who we bring onto the show and who's listening in on the Facebook chat. They typically be more knowledgeable than us. But again, thank you so much for your time. Like we certainly appreciate that you were able to join us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I hope we can. I'd love to invite you back anytime you ever are interested in coming back, because there's so much about your career that we didn't touch on.
Yeah.
Acting, writing, Wolverine,
Kazar.
The
editing Kazar.
Your film career and your career as a musician. Like there's so much to cover that there's just not enough time to do it in one show.
Right, and we have plans to be doing more, of these episodes, and so not to take too much of your time, but we'd love to have you back on the show and cover just other topics as well. So I know you get asked a lot of these same questions at a lot of the conventions you do, at a lot of the panels you do. So I would really love to kind of broach into other topics that you don't always get to discuss, with the fan base. So that'd be great to have you on.
Larry, instead of showering you with platitudes, as I've done many times before, I'd like to do a really quick speed round, 2 questions from the audience, because I like to try to give them, they're here with us watching, and so I'm going to give you 2 quick questions. Do you remember having a favorite storyline or story arc, or even a favorite single issue?
No.
See, this is the speed round.
Obviously, my 2 favorite issues are 21 and 26.
Yeah.
Yep. Love 26, 27. Okay, so Brian Greenwood wanted to know, did you ever hear the characters' voices in your head as you wrote them? And so now that you've maybe seen a little of the cartoon,
Well, I always hear the voice in my head, which is one of the reasons why I couldn't get into the cartoons, because they weren't the voices I hear.
Yeah.
I mean, Destro is Sean Connery, and Cobra Commander is Orson Welles.
Keep them coming.
Cobra Commander speaks in these round tones, and he uses, long words, and he's this pretentious ass, basically.
What are we going to do tonight, Destro? Well,
the other characters speak in the voices of the people that they're based on, and almost all the characters are based on people I know. Airtight is Kurt Schnurr, who's based on my friend Paul Kirchner, who's an illustrator and a cartoonist. It goes on and on. By basing the characters on people I know, it really helps to keep everything consistent. So I don't stray off the course with, mannerisms or, speech patterns or, or how they would react to a situation. And I think keeping the characters consistent is a big part of the believability, because lots of times you read, there's all these books you read that there's like 7 different people writing the same character.
Right, yeah.
And they write the character with different voices.
yeah.
Right.
It's very annoying, or they have characters. They have characters violate the core of the character. When I was doing Wolverine, there was one writer wrote a whole arc of Wolverine in another title where Wolverine he depicts Wolverine as being afraid of Cyber. And I said, wait a minute, Wolverine's not afraid of anybody.
Exactly.
I thought that was like such a horrible violation of the character. When I first started doing Wolverine, I decided that my canon was going to be Chris Claremont, Barry Smith, and Frank Miller. Period.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Nobody else's version was going to be part of my canon.
Yeah. And
that's what I always stuck with.
We've hit the 9:30 mark, and I really don't want to upset your dog.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if somebody's got a question, I'll answer it.
Oh! I have a short one. I know you've actually developed a pretty good relationship with Mary McDonnell Lewis through the conventions. Like, there's pictures of you guys like playing on like Rock'em Sock'em robots and stuff. So obviously, you didn't maybe know her before, but through conventions, you've met someone. One, do you hear her as Lady J now? But also, did you know Keone Young through your acting or any other way before he was on the show? Because when you talk to because Keone's like, I've known Larry for years.
I met him at East West Players many, many, many years ago. He was, and we have, we know lots of the same people. Pretty much every Asian actor in the country knows each other.
Yeah, and they all go through the East West Players too.
Yeah.
So when Keone got Storm Shadow, did he write you a letter like, guess who I'm playing? Or did he not even make the connection?
No, not really.
Larry, you might be under an NDA and not able to discuss this, and that's totally fine if that's the case. But I did read one of your posts on Facebook talking about your experience going to the set of Snake Eyes the film and reading the script and meeting the actors. And is there anything you can tell us about the upcoming film that, how G.I. Joe fans are? Half of them don't even want to see it because they didn't like the first 2 live action films. The other half can't wait. Yeah, I know. Are they real fans? I don't know. Anyway, can you tell us anything about the film that will bring that other half into the fray? Like get them excited. I'm already super excited. What did you learn?
Well, the thing is, it adheres more closely to the whole concept, because this is more of a martial arts movie than a science fiction movie. I mean, that was the problem with the first two G.I. Joe movies, that they were trying to be, Transformers or something, or it was playing too much on. They wanted to be like X-Men.
Yeah, with the uniforms being all black.
Right, and so this one is concentrates more on the ninja characters and on the characters themselves.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought in one of the best sword fight directors in Japan.
Awesome.
Who and he brought his whole crew.
Right.
And the action set pieces are amazing. They really stand up.
Did you visit them filming in Toronto? Is that what happened?
No, it was in Vancouver.
Vancouver. Got it. For those that don't know, they filmed in Vancouver last December. They filmed in Japan, I believe, January, February. Production is a wrap. They're editing right now, and hopefully it's still coming out this fall. Obviously, TBD with the situation with movie theaters right now. But I'm super excited about the film. I've heard the same thing that you just said, that the fight scenes are going to be unbelievable. I do know from the IMDb casting that Baroness is in it, Storm Shadow, Snake Eyes. There's a couple new characters. I think there's a love story in there somewhere, and I don't think it involves Scarlet. So,
it's really, the sets were just mind-boggling. They had a huge soundstage in Vancouver, and they built all these sets, and they did almost all the interiors there. And one of the sets was a narrow alley in Tokyo. And this set was like a block long. And they flew in, dozens of Japanese air conditioners to,
windows,
to dress this alley, and neon signs, and, the detail in this alley is just amazing. And it was set up so that it could rain. So I did a cameo on this alley set, walking the entire length in pouring rain.
Is that the first time you've made a cameo in these films? I believe it is, isn't it?
Well, no, I did a cameo in the first one, and it got cut.
Oh, so I didn't see it. That's why I didn't know.
Yeah. It was included in the extras disc. I was a NATO general in this conference scene right at the beginning of the movie.
I'm kind of surprised you've never done any voiceover work for any of the iterations of the animated series.
Well, I'm not on their radar for that. I used to do a lot of voiceovers. I used to narrate documentaries for PBS. I still belong to all the unions. I'm in Screen Actors Guild and Actors Equity, and I pay my dues. And back in the 70s, I was doing a bunch of voiceover stuff, and it was I could do it. I mean, I did one entire PBS documentary during lunch. I was an editor of Marvel. I went over to PBS on my lunch hour and did the whole doc, and then went back to Marvel. Because I used to do all this stuff in my fake Japanese accent. They would have a documentary. They wanted a slight Japanese accent, and I could control it. I was the voice of Kobo Abe in a documentary about Kobo Abe. The guy that wrote "Woman in the Dunes," and a bunch of really boring documentaries. I was also like bad guys in Sonny Chiba movies. Yeah. Oh, Mr. Chiba. Oh, we kill you now. The dubbing on kung fu movies was always really weird because back then it was all analog. You had a big room with a screen, movie screen, and one mic in the middle of the room, a music stand, and with the script on it. And they would hire 3 people to dub the entire movie. 2 guys and 1 girl, and you had to do all the voices for the movie, and you had to be able to nail it on 1 or 2 takes, or else they never called you back, because you basically had to dub an entire movie in one day.
Jeez.
Were the translations accurate, or did they just write what would fit in when the mouths were moving? That
They
sort
had
of
to
made
rewrite it
sense.
constantly because the first time I went in to do it, I'm in this room with a big screen, and there's this 12-foot step ladder, in the room. I'm going, what the heck is that about? And so we did a take, and the director says, okay, and the director comes out of the booth, climbs up on the ladder, and yells at, run it again. And he's up there next to the lips, making sure that it all matches up. If it didn't match up, you had to do it again.
Oh, jeez.
That's what it was like,
I've heard people who did the translations for Voltron, many of who were also on G.I. Joe, who did the ADR for Voltron. They're like, we had to talk so fast to get everything in because the translations usually ended up being longer than the actual line. So they had to just quickly get it. And yeah, they only got 1 or 2 takes. And okay, moving on.
Well, yeah, but it's also it's difficult because most Japanese words end in a vowel.
Oh, right.
Right. So they were constantly having to rewrite the dialogue to make that work. And if it didn't work, they had to rewrite it on the spot, and you had to pretty much wing it.
Well, Larry, I know we've tried to let you off the hook a few times here. I think I
Drag me back in.
officially let you off the hook.
Okay.
We're so grateful as a community that you're so accessible to us. Even though you've answered these same questions a multitude of times, you always do it in good spirits, and we always love hearing it. And every time that you share these stories with us, new people are hearing it, and it's very important for us to be able to connect with the creator of something that was so impactful on us as kids, to the point that we still love it now, decades later. So,
well, I like repeating the stories because they get better every time.
there you go. Embellish a little bit each time.
You just, it's like you got leeway for embellishment. Anyway, thanks for having me. I got to go walk the dog.
Sounds
It
good.
was a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, everybody. So signing off on Facebook as well. We'll see you guys next week.
He never gives up. He'll stay till the lights